Just a test.
Testing from my side as well. I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
All right, final test. You can hear me okay? Final test. Hello everyone, welcome and thank you so much for joining us here today. I know many of you dialed in to hear the conversation today between Andrew Rashbass and Michal Oshman. And Michal has just let us know today that unfortunately she's had a family emergency, but we of course wish Michal and her family the very best at this time. Fortunately, in preparing for this conversation, we had the opportunity to speak with Michal and to really hear from her many of the critical questions that are on so many HR leaders' minds, on her mind, and I'm sure on many of yours as well. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank many of you that sent questions in advance. And we're really looking forward to diving into those today, where I'm sure we're going to be covering many of the really critical questions that are on all organizations' minds, but particularly HR leaders. So please continue as we go to leave questions in the chat, and we will keep an eye on it and very much look forward to picking these up as we go as well. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Rashbass. I'm the CEO at 𝗙𝗃𝗄𝗧. I've been working at the intersection of HR and AI for nearly 3 years now. Before that, I worked in financial services for around a decade and also have an academic background in business psychology. I'm delighted today to be joined by our guest speaker, Andrew Rashbass. Andrew was the CEO of a number of very large, well-known companies, The Economist, Reuters, the news agency, Euromoney institutional investor, publicly listed information services company. He now works in AI research at the Van der Schaar lab in Cambridge University, one of the leading cutting-edge labs in the UK. He also has recently taught strategy to MBA students at Harvard Business School. He's an experienced CEO coach himself and works on a number of boards. But I think his most impressive accolade is being my father. So I want to start with one question, which I know was one that was very important to Michal as well, which is, I think it's worth starting off by thinking about what 3 of the key blind spots are that face a lot of HR leaders when it comes to AI. And I think it's important to start with this one because it's often those blind spots, we don't know what we don't know. And it's often, even when we think we're prepared, the blind spots can derail us. So I think this would be a great one to start with. And I'd like to start by asking, what are 3 of the key blind spots that face HR leaders about AI?
Well, first of all, again, let me say also very sorry that Michal's not able to join us at the last minute, and hope everything's okay with her and her family. I think it's a great question. I know Michal, as you say, was one that she was very much on her mind. This question of blind spots. Blind spots are what catches out. They're those unknown unknowns, and I think trying to surface them, trying to see what they might be, I think is very valuable. The first one which I would highlight is, I think HR leaders, like the people on this call today, I think it's very easy for them to assume that they're not going to be setting the AI agenda in their organization. And obviously in some areas that will be true. It might be by IT, it might be by the CEO themselves, it might be by another senior colleague. But I think there are so many areas where actually the HR lead and the head of HR and HR leaders need to set the agenda in AI. And I think the reason for that is, not only is it fundamental to the organization, but I think it's also fundamental to the future of HR, because I think this is HR's moment to move from being the facilitator, move from being the enabler, to being the one who actually changes the things that matter to the organization. So how the organization performs in the things that the organization cares about, not just making sure that people are trained for that, not just making sure that we monitor that, not just making sure that it turns up on the performance review process, not just making sure that it's in the incentive process, but that actually those things, the things that matter most to the organization, which might be margin, might be revenue growth, might be quality, that the fundamentals of that organization, that AI, under the leadership, I think, of HR, can actually intervene in those areas in order to drive the things, the measures, the actual underlying performance that the company cares about. So that's the first one. Is, I think HR has the opportunity to be a leader, and the blind spot is that I think today too many HR leaders perhaps think of themselves as followers. Secondly, I think there's some good grounds for this. for this blind spot, but I think we can move beyond it. So the blind spot is I think is that what we do with AI is automation. We take things we do today and we speed them up, we scale them up, and that has a big part to play, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But I think that we need also, alongside that, to be focusing on transformation. AI is not just an automation technology, it's a transformation technology. That is to say, doing things that were not possible before, not just speeding up things that we were already doing. And if we look at within HR, for instance, I'm sure we'll talk about this example again because it's it's an obvious one. Recruitment. I think that's an area where a lot of HR leaders are using AI already, and frankly, candidates are too. I think we've all seen that, this sort of arms race between the organization and the candidates in who can use AI more in the process. But today, most of it is, okay, can I get AI to write the job description? Can I get AI to write the job ad? Can I get AI to sift the CVs? Automation. But actually, we're not trying at the moment sufficiently to use AI to transform the recruitment process. So I'll give you an example. Maybe we shouldn't be thinking about such a narrow pool. Why are we limited to the pool we are? Because we have no way to manage an engagement with a much wider pool of candidates. We have no way to manage the initial engagement. We have no way to manage the recruitment process. But if AI is handling a lot of that, then potentially we can put our net an awful lot wider in the recruitment process. And I think that would be transformational. I think there are many other areas of recruitment that could be transformed as well, but that's just one. And I think the third one comes back to this point that you made, Eddie, about I don't know what I don't know, and this feeling that you're behind, or that HR leaders feel that they're behind. You're not behind. That's the blind spot. The blind spot is thinking that you're behind and therefore being, to a certain extent, paralyzed by that feeling of being behind. And I want to say to HR leaders, no, you're not behind, and don't be paralyzed by what you don't know. Use it as a, the fact that you're here, I think, says something about your desire to learn. But I want to take that further and say, let's turn the desire to learn into an ability to act. And therefore, don't be, as I say, the third blind spot, don't allow yourself to be paralyzed by what you don't know. So those would be the three that I would point to. You have an opportunity to lead. Don't fall into the trap of thinking you have to be a follower in AI. Secondly, think transformation, not just automation. And thirdly, don't be paralyzed. See it as an opportunity to act, not an opportunity to sit on the sidelines.
Yeah, I think those are three really powerful ideas, and we hear it a lot. I hear it a lot when I'm talking to HR leaders, that they have a certain fear that comes from not understanding AI. And in fact, surveys have shown, and studies have shown, that it's one of the biggest barriers preventing wider AI adoption is that feeling that we don't understand it. So I think even if there's lots of people in that situation, and perhaps it shouldn't be a blind spot, I think it's worth taking a moment to think about and maybe ask you, how does AI work? And is that one of the keys? Is understanding that the key to kind of bringing this barrier down?
Yeah, I mean, it seems such an obvious question. Tell me how AI works. And obviously that's a big question, but it's we could spend obviously the whole hour talking about how AI works, but I don't think actually you need to know how AI works. I think what we have to focus on is what AI does. I mean, here we are in this, heaven knows how many layers of technology are between you and me at the moment, never mind between our other people who are part of this conversation, the audience today. I wonder how many of us actually understand how it works. We don't. We can be using this amazing technology, and it's transforming the way we do business, and everyone on this call does business, and yet none of us perhaps understand how it works. What we understand is what it does. And I think if we think about the technologies we use, from the mobile phone to which, never mind just making calls, how many of us understand how that works, and to browsing, to all the apps that we use, to understanding all the steps that go on to make an Amazon purchase arrive at your door. What we need to understand is what it does, not how it does it. And I want to suggest that the same is true with AI. So what we need to focus on is what can it do? Now, I think the other thing about AI that's even stranger than, or even in terms of how it works, is that even some of the developers of some of the leading cutting-edge AI that we use are surprised by the capabilities. That's to say, the capabilities are what are known as emergent. They're not kind of built in the specification. They emerge surprisingly sometimes from the capabilities, from the abilities of the AI. So if we focus on what it does, the starting point, I think, is to start using it so that you all get a feel for what it does. And I hope you're all using whatever your preferred AI is, whether that's ChatGPT or that's Claude or that's Gemini. I mean, we could spend a whole session talking about the differences between them. But I think the important thing is that you are using one and that you're using it in your everyday life, that you are trying it in small ways in your work life, perhaps today. But the thing perhaps just to draw your attention to that maybe you're not thinking or using enough today is most of us, I think, use AI today to get insights. We ask it questions and it gives us an answer. It tells us stuff. We need to move beyond AI that just tells us things to AI that does stuff. And we call AI that does stuff, we call that agentic AI. We call that AI agents. I'm sure many of you have heard that. It's a big topic emerging, and it's going to be perhaps a big theme for 2026 as well, is agentic AI that does something. So we move from perhaps an AI that tells you the criteria for, to take the recruitment case we were dealing with before, that moves from the criteria for helps you with the criteria that you should be using to select candidates for shortlist, to perhaps actually not just suggesting to you the criteria, but actually perhaps doing the interviews, doing that first round interviews. Because if we're going to use AI to widen the funnel, again, another agentic activity perhaps of getting it to reach out to these large number of potential applicants, then actually getting it to do that initial interview, not taking humans out of the loop, but doing that stage where humans wouldn't even have been involved because we'd have never seen those candidates. So thinking about AI that does stuff, thinking about AI that doesn't just suggest scripts for customer service to use, but actually does at least the first round of customer service. Thinking about not just AI that suggests process improvements in how finance can close the month. So today, finance is closing the month maybe on day, depends on your organization, day 8, day 9, day 10, day 11, whatever it may be. But actually saying, how can we get AI to close the month or do 90% of the work? That is agentic AI. So one of the things I would encourage you to think about when you, as I say, first of all, think about what it does, and then within the sphere of what it does, move beyond. Definitely start using it yourself if you're not already, but then in particular start looking for examples of where it's doing stuff, not just saying stuff.
Yeah, I think it's really fascinating, this idea of AI moving from just words into doing and moving into the real world, and not just helping me with something I'm doing, but actually doing something instead of me. And you've spoken about how that touches on all different functions in the business, finance, you touched on customer service, and really every part of the business. And of course, HR has an impact, has an influence, plays a critical role in all of those. But I think probably for a lot of the HR leaders and colleagues on the call today, I think it'll be probably particularly interesting and relevant to dive into, where does AI impact the employee life cycle, perhaps even from before they've even come through the door? And thinking again, as you've already started saying, not just helping prepare a job script, but actually maybe even going further and doing some of the and doing as well. So where would you say that AI is touching the employee life cycle at the moment?
Just to pick up on something you just said earlier, you said instead of me, yeah. But of course, that's automation, right? Doing stuff instead of you, and I think that's really important. So I don't want to underestimate. I think that's definitely going to be a big focus over the coming months. But I think we need to start preparing for transformation, looking for ways for AI to do things that we can't do or that we haven't been able to do. And I think that you can see that within the employee life cycle. So we were talking about widening the funnel, but actually it's funny, we think about the employee life cycle, and it starts kind of with this thought that they're an employee. Now, we might do the gateway bit when we're recruiting them to become an employee, but we're thinking about that relationship from the moment we're looking at them as an individual for a particular role to join our organization. Some organizations, many organizations aspire to this, some organizations do it better than others, but at the moment we do this very broad thing that we call employer branding, right? How do we become the kind of organization that people want to join? And really what most organizations mean by that, if they mean anything, is make sure that once somebody is applying for a role, that's a good process, that the Glassdoor ratings are respectable, that the automated emails that go out when somebody applies for a job work and are friendly, etc. But actually, imagine that we extended this to actually start to build relationships well before we knew there was a role and well before somebody might think that they were interested in coming and work for our company. And being able to do that, I believe, has to be done at the individual level. Now, of course, that was impossible in pre-AI days, because how could you possibly maintain relationships with potentially thousands of people? And AI gives you this opportunity to maintain individual relationships with thousands. Let's take another area of transformation. I don't know, let's say you're a 5,000 person organization. And let's say that you have a churn rate of 10% of people leave, 500 a year. And let's say that 50% of that's regretted leaving, that half of those, you regret leaving, that they're leaving you. That's 250 people. And obviously, if you were a bigger organization, it would be more than that. And let's imagine, therefore, that over 4 or 5 years, you're going to have 1,000 people. And over a longer period or in a bigger organization, it's going to be a multiple of that. Actually, here are people whom we know. Here are people who know us. Here are people whom we have trained. Here are people who actually are presumably going off to get other experiences outside that might be really valuable for us. How wonderful it would be, how much lower risk and higher opportunity it would be to get them back. But how many of us are actually in a position to maintain a relationship with thousands and thousands of alumni? We do it in informal ways. We kind of hope that they'll keep in touch with us. Maybe they might read the annual report, etc. Maybe they might come to our website now and again. But imagine that we could use AI to maintain a relationship that was looking at appropriate things that we could send them to stay engaged, as we would with customers, to stay engaged with that alumni community. Now, you and I are very passionate about performance and culture and the impact of performance and culture. And again, one of the things that I've been very taken by is over the years is where are the tools to help with that? And again, maybe that's something we can talk a bit more about how AI can help with that. L&D, one of the things that I, again, passionate about is what you can call the learning action gap. We learn things in the classroom, we learn things online in courses, and then it doesn't get triggered when we're acting. How can we bridge the learning action gap? I believe that's prime territory for AI. So I think we can look at every area, whether that's career management, whether that's reward, whether that's well-being. I think all these areas are fantastic areas for transformation through and with AI.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting how AI starts the employee life cycle perhaps a lot earlier than we would otherwise. And also the last time the employee walks out the door, actually with AI, it's much more likely that it won't be the last time that they're walking out the door. The whole way that we interact with alumni and the way we think about alumni just becomes completely different. And you really touched on the full spectrum of the employee life cycle. And one of the areas that you touched on was performance and kind of culture. And I know that's a space which is close to both of our hearts. And obviously many of our clients, the big thing on their mind is, I really want to drive a culture of accountability, a solution-driven culture, autonomous, where people come and they solve problems. But how do you actually help people to do that? And that's, of course, what we're focused on. But what I'm interested by is you've spoken about so many areas where AI can completely transform an organization within the employee lifecycle, completely transform it for the organization and for the individual. With so many options, what was it about this kind of learning action gap, helping companies to drive performance in the flow of work, that you thought this one is particularly suited to AI or of particular interest when there are, so many kind of great candidates as you've just described?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, lots of opportunities to use AI. Well, I was a CEO for decades, and one of the things that changed from the time I started work, anyways, before you were born, but so when I started work, culture was the thing you wanted to maintain. It was the persistent thread in your organization. And typically, many organizations worked in one or two buildings, and they had this institutional memory. And the purpose and the discussion about culture was the maintenance of culture. I was then lucky enough, if you like, to work in industries that were highly disrupted, and I think that's kind of all industries nearly today. And when an industry is disrupted, you may very well need a different culture. So that the culture challenge became one of how do you change culture, not how do you maintain it. Because to maintain culture, I think the processes of an organization help you to maintain culture. That's kind of why they are the processes that they are. And the people that you have typically will have been selected around that culture, and the people that they will select will be the same kind of culture. So there is a tendency, and an organization is well designed to maintain culture. When there's rapid change in the markets that you operate in, rapid change in the technologies that affect the organization and its markets and its customers, you potentially need a different culture. You need perhaps to have a culture of speed. You need to perhaps have a culture that takes more risk. You need to have a culture that innovates more. You need to have a culture that perhaps, in certain many of the cultures I've worked in have not been collaborative cultures, but the new world requires collaborative culture. Maybe because it's no longer the case that it's so easy to sell to customers, or that you know what customers want, that you need to have more customer centricity. Maybe there needs to be a focus on quality, or things have changed in the world that mean that the culture needs to change. Changing culture, the existing processes, potentially the mindsets of the people you have, all these things do not lend themselves, the institutional memory does not lend itself to changing culture. And I was frustrated as a CEO that we did this amazing work, and I don't mean we, as a community, I'm sure all of you do this amazing work of identifying what culture you need, amazing work identifying what culture you have, and then no tools other than maybe the posters in the elevator, and maybe a couple of boxes on the performance on the appraisal form, to get you from A to B, from the culture you have to the culture you need. And therefore, what I wanted to do was to see, as I began, I'd been involved in AI 30 years ago, and I'd stayed sort of in touch but not involved. And as I returned to the AI world 30 years later, I suddenly saw this opportunity to use AI to solve the biggest unsolved problem I'd had as a CEO, which is how do you move from the culture you have to the culture you need to deliver the performance that you need in a world that's changing kind of at a speed that was unknown when I started my career journey.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a really great reason why. And I know when we speak to a lot of companies, this is one of the areas where it's not, even before, there wasn't that they were doing things and now they were looking to automate. They actually didn't have so many ways actually to tackle this in the first place. I've seen that we've just had a question in from one of the colleagues that are with us on the call today. So thank you so much for sharing. I thought perhaps we can look at that, because I think it's a really important question. Mm-hmm. So the question is, I'm curious to understand which department tends to be responsible for making sure everyone in an organization is comfortable using AI in their everyday work. Is it the HR department, or is it the data and technology department, or is it some type of collaboration? So I think this touches on perhaps some of the blind spots actually that we started off with at the beginning. So be very interested on your take on that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think there's real value in trying to get everyone up to speed with AI and to use AI, and I think that's true. I'm a great believer that things happen in organization if there is a business rationale for it happening. And therefore, I think the breakthroughs are going to happen when each department, regardless of what department it is, starts saying, I can transform my department. I can be more effective in what we are here to do as a department if we use AI. So rather than saying it's somebody else's job, whether that's HR or IT, and fine, there should be courses available. There should be the technology should be available, to employees and to team members on their desktops, etc. Of course it should. But what really makes the difference is when a frontline manager says, I can grow by 10% if I could do this with AI. When somebody in charge of customer success says, I can change the face of customer satisfaction if I can do this. When the examples we have, if we say I can change the retention within my organization if I do this. So to me, rather than seeing it as, because I think if we go too much or uniquely down the education route, I think what tends to happen is you get the learning action gap. You get, okay, I learned all this in the virtual or real classroom. Now, how do I apply that in my real world? What I would like to advocate for is this constant thinking of, okay, what are the transformational things that I can do, and how can AI allow me to do those transformational things towards the business goals of the organization? So every time, transformation and impact happens in organization, not because I've just educated people. I'm not saying doesn't have a value, but it's sort of, to a degree, necessary, but it's definitely not sufficient. The thing that drives change in organization is change to the things that the organization cares about. The bottom line in some cases, the top line in other cases, the number of patents, the number of customers that are retained. I mean, I've worked in business where a change in the ability to retain customers is the biggest single transformation. If you're in a high churn with customers, customer churn business, changing that churn rate is fundamental. And that's the sort of thing that I think we need to be thinking about. And all the departments that are interested in that, which I hope is all of them, should be saying, what can I do with AI that's going to change the customer experience such that my churn rate will change?
I think what's interesting is that as HR leaders, as department leaders start to think about what are these problems they've always had that they could completely transform using AI, and as they start to build more understanding about it, it's still something which they haven't done before. It's still using software, buying software, integrating software, which has never been done before. Definitely nothing like it outside of a tech department. And we know that taking the lead yourself as an HR leader is such an important part of this. So I think it's also worth, even if we don't have to understand how AI works, as long as we understand what it does, I think it's actually still quite important when we have, and hopefully, lots of people on the call, perhaps some people are inspired by ideas they've had in the past, ideas that are coming to them now. How would they go about and actually buy AI and to try and test some of these ideas to solve problems that were never previously solvable, to raise the margin, etc.?
Yeah. So I think organizations doing things they haven't done before is always one of the pressure points for change, and because the processes don't always exist for exactly that, or the processes are tuned to something else. So if you think about, I mean, people on this call today are heavily skewed towards HR, and so let's compare it with HRIS, right? The HR information systems, or the HR system that sits in the heart of your business. It's not going to be the same process. It's going to be related, but not the same. If you try and buy AI and the transformational AI capabilities that I'm advocating for to solve the critical business problems that you have, or to reach the critical business opportunities that are core to your company. It's not going to be like buying the HR system. And if you try and make it like the HR system, i.e., I'm going to do, first of all, I do a RFP, I do a request for proposal, and I collect all the functionality that I need, and I come up with 1,000 things that I need, and I go out to the market to 30 people who provide basically the same thing, and I score them one against the other, and if you go to, and I'm expected to bring this in, and I'm going to depreciate it over 5 years, but I hope to keep it for 10 years, and I know, and what I will want for it in 5 years' time is exactly what I want from it today. If you go into AI with that mindset, you will fail. So when you ask, I think, the excellent question, how do you buy AI? You don't buy it like that. It's not, obviously, one needs to be conscious of an appropriate governance, appropriate procurement process. I'm a CEO, of course. I worry about risk, and I worry about doing procurement, and I worry about not wasting money, and I worry about getting the best deal, etc. Of course, I worry about all those things. Heaven knows, cyber security, everything else. Of course, I worry about those things. But if I take the approach that I took when I allowed the organization to take an approach that it takes when it's buying an HR system, we will never bring in AI into our organization, and others who will leap ahead of us, and we will lose. So the risks we face by following the wrong process, I think, are far, far greater than being more fluid, appropriate, but more fluid in buying AI. So what would I say? First of all, lead. So this is one you can learn from 𝗪𝗪, because in 𝗪𝗪, you would never, the people on this call would never delegate responsibility to another department. You wouldn't say, oh, IT is going to buy me an HR system and I'll use that, or procurement's going to buy me an HR system, or whatever they select is fine by me. You would never cross your mind that you would say, no, this is my system, and of course I need to work with procurement. Of course I need to work with IT. So that's the first thing. That's one to learn from 𝗪𝗪. First of all, you lead. Secondly, though, you've got to be pragmatic. You can't go at the speed and the comprehensiveness and the kind of long-term, I know exactly what I want for 10 years. You cannot do that. You have to be more pragmatic. Thirdly, you deal with some of the risks by piloting, but you must pilot meaningfully. Don't pilot in a sandbox. Don't pilot in something that the organization doesn't care about, because there will always be frictions that are created. There'll always be grit in the machine, and if what you're trying to do with the pilot doesn't matter, then it will never be able to overcome that grit. So you must do something that you deeply you must pilot with something that you deeply care about. You talked about automation, doing things that already happen. Yes, think about automation. That's the fourth thing I would talk about. But pick something that also has transformative, doing critical things that you've never been able to do before. Buy for speed, both because if you wait too long, if you go down the 3-year project process, by the time you get there, the technology will have changed, your needs will have changed, the market will have changed, the customers will have changed, the competitors will have changed. You've got to buy for speed. And part of that is buy in a different way. Buy and expect to iterate. So buy for speed and then expect to iterate. Get somewhere, pilot meaningfully, and then expect to iterate. And then finally, the final thing I'd point to is, we're always doing these calculations of career risk about what's good. Yes, there will be some, what happens if I get it wrong? Okay, what happens if you don't do it at all? I think that don't do it at all is today a bigger career risk than a sensible, pragmatic approach to innovating within your organization and leading. I think I'm conscious in this conversation that we are talking with examples, but it's actually at a relatively high level. We have what we think is a great example. You were asking me about what the motivation I had for embarking on using AI to transform culture within organizations. Why don't we show that for a brief few minutes, just as an example for people, so they can get an idea of what, in our view anyway, but I hope people will agree, transformational AI is within an HR context in the in an organization, and where it's an HR thing, yes, but it's all about the fundamentals of that company. So Eddie, why don't we just do a brief demo of Sculpture AI so that people can see an example of transformational AI in action?
Absolutely, I would be happy to bring out some of the ideas that we've been speaking about. Let's just bring up the screen share now, please. Thank you. So the transformative use case that we're going to use as an example that we're helping companies with at Sculpture AI is how do we take the culture, the behaviors that the company knows that they want, and to help people in the moment that they're working to unlock those behaviors. So the example that we're going to look at here is that Alex had written to Jordan with a new idea. And Jordan's writing back to Alex, says, I wanted to chat about this meeting we had, specifically this idea you pitched. I know you suggested integrating AI. I think it's over schedule. Don't get me wrong, I get where you're coming from, but we need to focus on what's practical, not to showcase tech wizardry, think about the team's workload, etc. So many companies want to be more innovative. They want to push the boundaries. They want to create new things that the market hasn't seen before. But of course, when it actually comes down to it, it's very difficult because there are all these risks, all these constraints, all these practicalities. So how can a company who's trying to drive a more innovative mindset help colleagues to do that at the moment that it actually matters? Of course, you can always run more workshops about innovation, but when there's that gap that we discussed before between the learning action gap, what about actually if it was possible to actually give someone a nudge as they're working, that right now, this thing that you're doing is a moment where you can unlock innovation, this thing that you're doing right now. And by that, of course, it impacts this moment, but also trains the person's brain in a different way because they're engaged in learning as they're doing, which is not normally the way that learning is possible to be done. And you can see over here that Jordan, within her workflow, is able to invite Sculpture in before she sent her email. And you could see it cycling through the company's goals, what the company's trying to drive. And let's see what it says to her. So just to pick out a couple of the key points, it pulls Jordan back and helps her realize, again, in a way that's never before been possible in the flow of work, you could get this reflection that understands you, understands the company, understands what the company's trying to achieve, and helps you be a more innovative version of yourself. And helps Jordan take a step back and think, is there a way that I could balance ambition and practicality? Maybe a pilot project, maybe a phased approach. Asking Jordan this critical question before she sends her email. How can we integrate AI while staying practical? Email support is often about the language. Is there a way I can say what I'm trying to say better, more clear? But actually, this is transformative because is there a way I can actually do something completely different that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise? And for each person, this might be once a day, twice a day. But if you've got 1,000 people, that's 2,000 a day, 10,000 a week of unlocking these little moments. These little moments are what makes the culture, are what drives performance, the decision here, the mindset there, the attitude. And it's these moments unlocking which transforms performance. And you may be thinking that, well, that's only if Jordan says, please help me. But transformation actually takes us a step further. What if we can actually tell Jordan without her even asking, Jordan, this is one of those moments, completely privately to her, because this is not a spy. It's there as a development tool, a transformative development tool for Jordan. So you could see here, Marcus is writing an email saying, I can't give you an update on this because Monica's on holiday. There are always obstacles. But what do you do when there's an obstacle? Do you just kind of back down? Or is there a way to transform these little moments? And you can see over here that these technologies, AI, which can see before Marcus has sent it, that this is one of those moments where you can be more determined and be the best version of yourself. And by flagging this, again, only in the most critical of emails, it can then give Marcus something to think about before he sends it, which is, could you suggest interim steps? Could you seek team input? How can you be more determined? So when you think about trying to drive a more determined culture, it's these little moments that unlock it, but it's never been possible to access that before. And it's completely transformative, not only for the person to be able to get support as they're working about this exact thing they're doing, but actually to know without asking, this is one of those moments. And the final thing to show, which actually just takes the transformation one stage further, is what if the person hasn't even done anything? You would think in order to help kind of someone convert learning to action, they have to do something, and then you say, actually, no, you should do it like this. But what if we can actually see, and AI can see, and these transformative tools can see that you're currently in a situation where this is what you might want to be thinking about? And one way to do that is by, when you receive an email, there's a chain, there's a situation that you found yourself in. What if we can orientate the person's thinking and give them a nudge before they've even done anything? And you could see here in this situation that Ben's written to Patrick expressing concern about something that was going on in the modeling team. They don't know what they're doing, they haven't started, and he's kind of looking for validation. And as soon as Patrick here, Ben, as soon as Ben pushes response, Patrick, as soon as Patrick pushes reply, but before he's done anything, it flags to Patrick that this is a great leadership moment, because Ben's invited you to kind of validate his feelings. But being a leader gives you the opportunity to go a step further and actually steer the conversation productively. And the opportunity you have here, and again, transformational, to realize that this little moment that I have now is not just a nothing moment. No, this is an opportunity for me to step up as a leader, and not just to validate his observations, but actually to propose a constructive next step. So I think what we've used, these examples to show how AI is allowing us to solve problems, and we've spoken about lots in the recruitment space, in the alumni space, this particularly close to our hearts in the L&D and the culture space, which is helping people to unlock moments of performance. And it's all these little moments that add up to the overall culture, the overall performance, which even when we know exactly what we want to drive, has been so challenging. I'm just I'm sharing here just ways, to get in touch. If anybody would like to talk more about ways that AI such as this can help transform your organization's culture, there's a link here on Calendly which allows you to book a meeting with myself. There's also my email address and LinkedIn as well. And would love to connect and to talk with as many of you as possible. So I hope that's an interesting example. And I think perhaps let's imagine that in all the examples that we've spoken about today, some of the people on the call are inspired, that they want to do something. They're excited by learning more about the opportunities that AI offers. So I think a good question to come to now would be, what should HR leaders do now? We've spoken about some of the principles, to buy when they're ready in there, but how do you take the first step as an AI leader to solve whatever problem, be it in the culture space, be it in the recruitment space, be it in another part of the organization that HR are getting involved in as well?
I like to think it's a great example that you've shown. It's obviously one, as you say, very close to my heart, and very much geared towards, I think, a more general product, which is why I haven't just built it for myself. We've built it for everyone. I think it shows this idea of transformation. And I also think that there's a great conversation going on in the comments I can see, and in the chat. And Sandy, I think what you're saying about, but first of all, great example, by the way, of what Monica when Monica's on holiday. Great example of the handover. I couldn't agree more. But I also think the point you made about the role that everyone has, leaders have, and HR certainly have, on this question of people worry that AI is going to take their jobs. And to me, I hope also what we showed is not just as you put very clearly in your comment, which I think is excellent, which is no, it can free them up. But I hope also what this example shows you is it can actually make them better. So it's not just there's a whole underworld being done by AI. It's much more, has the potential anyway, to be much more integrated than that. That it's like an exoskeleton, right? That it's something that makes me stronger, makes the individual stronger. It's not just something that either replaces or frees up. That there is this third way as well, which is empowers. And I think that is what we're going to see a huge amount of AI in the workplace. When we take all of that and we take the kind of, I can see here the we've got Martin here in the comments, Martin Egan, saying that Sculpture AI is definitely an aid. And he says, my view is that a culture strategy needs to have a coherent and robust culture plan that will increase the likelihood of the desired target and culture embedding. I agree with you completely. And again, we believe that the way to do that is not to separate culture from the day-to-day activity, but actually to embed everything you're doing in the day-to-day workflow in a way that is completely bespoke to the company. It has to be about what the company, you're absolutely right about the culture plan, it has to be about what that company is trying to do. And I think that that is a blueprint. Come back to the question that Eddie was asking me before about how do you buy it. It's about making it relevant to your organization. It's not this generic thing, which again, as I think part of the issue sometimes with I went and bought something on LinkedIn Learning, and it was an excellent course on the foundations of AI, or whatever. But how do I make that relevant? So by focusing everything on the business goals of your organization, what it is that will transform your organization, what are the critical measures in your organization, that is how we have to think about the use of AI. A sculpture as an example, what we've tried to do with sculpture is to make sure that it is tuned to your organization, to your culture plan, to what's going to make the difference to your organization. And I think that is the first thing, in answer to the question that Ellie asked me about, what do HR leaders have to do? What matters to your organization? Take the things that really will be transformative to your organization, and let's work on that, because I am pretty sure that in a good number of those, if not the majority, AI will have a critical role to play. Because I hear so often, just in your own areas of HR, how often have I heard we don't have the data, our systems don't talk to each other, we're too busy doing the day-to-day. For a start, AI can solve huge amounts of those problems, so that actually you now have not just the tools, but also the time potentially, and potentially, with the efficiencies that I believe it will bring, potentially one can make a business case too, i.e. the efficiencies as well as the growth that you're going to get from implementing AI. So the first thing to say is, what do you have to do? You have to unleash the fact that you are business people first and HR people second. You're not, because if it's not just about HR transactions, it's not just about getting people in and exiting them elegantly. No, it's about actually, you are business people, you are senior business people. What are your business goals, and how can you use AI? So that's the first thing that I think they have to do, is to lead, and to lead as business people. Secondly, I think you have to get going. I think your competitors are getting going. I think your customers are getting going. I think you have to get going. You have to get over your I'm not saying you're all in this position, but we have to at least get to a pilot. And I would be, if I would be targeting people in my own organizations, and I would suggest that you target yourself and others within the organization. Say, okay, we need 1 or 2 pilots. If you're not already running good pilots, you should be running them within the next 3 months, and you should be planning scaled rollout within the next 6. You have to set quite aggressive targets, I think, for the implementation and rollout, because this AI stuff, I'm a bit of a technology skeptic. I'm in some ways a technologist, but I have a healthy skepticism about technology. But this one is real. I've been around an awful lot. I've seen a lot of technologies. I've seen and I've been dismissive of many of them. This one is real. This one is big, and this AI train is leaving. I hope what you've seen with the Sculpture AI demo that Ellie gave is that if culture is your thing, I'm not saying there's no other product that can do that, but what is possible is changed, and it's changed over the last months. Pick something that's fundamental to you, and if that's culture, we'd be delighted to help you with that. But if it's something else, you will find there is a Sculpture AI in the area that you are interested in. Speak to them, pilot with them, make a move with them. Because you can get and use this confident pragmatism to implement your first and early pilots. So I think it's such a great opportunity for HR leaders where we are today. I have never felt more confident about the HR function, but and it's relying on you as the leadership of tomorrow, today's HR and tomorrow's HR to grab this position. There's all this thing at the moment about kind of amalgamating IT and HR. That's an interesting idea, but it can't be the case that, oh, it's technology, so it has to be the CTO who ends up kind of setting that, because you have so much that you bring to the table, and AI can help you with that. So my advocacy to you, my exhortation to you is be that leader. I think it's an amazing opportunity for you. We would, we're here to help you in our little area. If that's relevant to you, I hope it will be to many of you. But whether it's us or anyone else, this is an amazing opportunity it's an amazing time to be an HR leader.
I think that's a great message to end on. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you, our guest speaker, Andrew Rashbass, so much for joining us. And I know I learned a lot. I'd like to thank all the guests joining us on the webinar today. Just bringing up on screen a final reminder of the 3 easy ways to get in touch with us. And please do, I'd love to continue the conversation with all of you. Please keep an eye on the 𝗪𝗏𝗃 LinkedIn page, for future great events. And happy to give everybody back 10 minutes in their day. Thank you so much again for joining. Wishing everybody a good rest of the day, and look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.